Deep in the Carina Nebula, Research Station Omega-7 hung like a delicate silver spider web against the backdrop of swirling cosmic gases. Dr. Elena Rossi sat in the observation dome, her dark eyes fixed on the latest sensor readings. 20 years of searching for intelligent life, and all they'd found were bacterial colonies and fossilized remains. But something about today's data made her skin prickle. "Director, you need to see this." Her assistant James Chen's voice crackled through the comm, "Something's interfering with our long-range sensors." Elena frowned at the cascading numbers on her holographic display. "Solar flare." "No. It's moving. And it's big." She was already heading for the main lab when the station's proximity alarms began to wail. Through the reinforced windows, she saw it, a shape that seemed to drink in light rather than reflect it. The object was massive, easily twice the size of their station, with a biological yet geometric structure that defied standard classification. "All personnel, emergency protocols are now in effect," Elena announced, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "This is not a drill." The thing outside their station shifted, revealing what appeared to be sensory organs. It was alive. And it was studying them. Station records would later show that first contact lasted exactly 12 minutes. The creature approached, its outer membrane rippling with patterns that their computers would spend years trying to decode. But what happened next defied all first contact protocols and expectations. The creature recoiled. There was no other way to describe it. The massive entity physically jerked away from the station as if struck, its surface patterns shifting to chaotic frequencies. Before anyone could react, it had vanished into the nebula's gases, leaving behind only scattered sensor readings and very confused humans. "What just happened?" James asked, his face pale under the emergency lights. Elena shook her head, already pulling up the sensor logs. "I don't know. But whatever that was, it was scared of us." The news spread quickly through human space. Humanity's first encounter with advanced alien life hadn't ended in communication, warfare, or cultural exchange, but with the alien equivalent of someone seeing a spider and running away screaming. Over the next few weeks, similar reports began trickling in from other research stations and colonies. Dark shapes that fled when spotted. Massive biological vessels that changed course to avoid human ships. The galaxy's reaction to humanity wasn't hostile or peaceful, it was terrified. Admiral Sarah Chen stood before the United Earth Council, her uniform crisp despite the late hour. "The entity we encountered at Omega-7 matches descriptions of what the Centaurians call shadow hunters. According to their records, these creatures are apex predators on a galactic scale. They've wiped out entire civilizations. Yet they're avoiding us like we're plague carriers. Could we be?" Counselor Rodriguez asked. "Maybe we carry some pathogen that's lethal to them." "Our xenobiology team ruled that out," Elena interjected. She'd been called to Earth to present her findings. "Their biological structure is too different. We're looking at something else, something fundamental about human beings that triggers an intense fear response in these creatures." The council chamber erupted in debate. Some saw it as an advantage to be exploited. Others worried about the diplomatic implications. How could humanity join the galactic community if one of its dominant species fled at the sight of them? But Elena couldn't shake what she'd seen in those brief minutes of contact. The creature's patterns hadn't just shown fear, they'd shown recognition. As if something about humans had triggered a deeply buried instinct, an ancient memory of danger. Back at her lab on Omega-7, Elena began comparing the creature's pattern frequencies to every known biological signal. Human brainwaves, electromagnetic fields, cellular vibrations, anything that might explain the Shadowhunter's reaction. James thought she was obsessed, but she knew she was close to something unprecedented. The answer, when it came, was buried in humanity's own past. "Look at this," she told James one night, pulling up two wavelength patterns. "This is the frequency pattern from the Shadowhunter when it first approached us. And this. She pulled up another reading. This is a human temporal lobe during REM sleep. James leaned closer. They're inversely synchronized. Exactly. Our brainwaves during dreams are completely antagonistic to their basic biological functions. We're not just unappetizing to them, we're walking bioweapons. Every sleeping human broadcasts a signal that disrupts their entire nervous system. It was an evolutionary quirk, a cosmic coincidence that had turned humanity from potential prey into something the galaxy's apex predators couldn't bear to be near. The very thing that let humans process their daily experiences and form memories was anathema to the Shadowhunter's existence. As Elena prepared her findings for publication, she couldn't help but smile at the irony. Humanity had spent centuries wondering if they'd be worthy of joining the galactic community, fear of being too primitive or weak to survive among the stars. Instead, they'd walked onto the cosmic stage and discovered they were the monsters under the bed. The real question now was, what would humanity do with this power? Would they become the very predators they'd replaced, or would they find a way to use their unique ability to protect those who couldn't protect themselves? As she stared out at the nebula where they'd made first contact, Elena knew this was just the beginning. Humanity hadn't just found its place in the galaxy, they'd discovered they'd had it all along, written in the very patterns of their dreams. The discovery of humanity's effect on the Shadowhunters spread through the scientific community like wildfire. Within months, research stations across human space were retrofitted with dream pattern amplifiers, devices that broadcast human REM frequencies into space. The predators that had terrorized the galaxy for millennia now gave human settlements a wide berth. But nature, as Dr. Marcus Wong was about to discover, abhors a vacuum. The colony ship, New Horizons, shuddered as another gravitational wave hit its shields. Marcus steadied himself against his lab console, watching as his carefully calibrated equipment recorded the impossible. The Shadowhunter pursuing them was young, barely half the size of an adult, and apparently immune to their dream pattern defenses. "How long until we reach the jump point?" he asked the ship's AI. 17 minutes at current velocity, Arya responded. The creature's resistance to the dream patterns appears to be increasing with exposure. Marcus cursed under his breath. He'd warned the Xenobiology Council about this possibility. Dream pattern broadcasts had worked too well, too quickly. Any species that survived long enough to become apex predators would have to be adaptable. The ship shuddered again. Through the viewport, he could see the Shadowhunter's dark mass gaining on them, its crystalline surface pulsing with hungry intent. The younger ones were always bolder, less bound by their species' instinctive fear of humans. "All hands, prepare for emergency maneuver," Captain Yuki Tanaka's voice rang through the ship. "Dr. Wong, we need options." Marcus's fingers flew over his console, reviewing decades of research in minutes. Elena Rossi's original discovery had focused on REM sleep patterns, but human brains generated dozens of distinct frequencies. If the Shadowhunters were adapting to one. "Arya, reconfigure the broadcast array," he ordered. "Switch to delta wave patterns, frequency modulated to match the creature's own biorhythms." The AI complied instantly, but Marcus knew it was a gamble. Delta waves were the slowest brain frequencies, produced during deep, dreamless sleep. They were also, theoretically, the most disruptive to the Shadowhunter's crystalline biology. The effect was immediate and violent. The young Shadowhunter convulsed, its surface patterns becoming chaotic. But instead of fleeing, it charged directly at them. "Brace for impact," Tanaka shouted. The collision never came. At the last moment, the creature's path curved away from the ship, its massive form writhing in what could only be described as agony. As they watched, its crystalline structure began to fragment, pieces breaking off into space. "Stop the broadcast," Marcus ordered, his voice hoarse. "Switch back to standard REM patterns." The creature stabilized, though its surface still rippled with distress. For a moment, it hung in space, oriented toward their ship. Marcus could have sworn he felt its attention focus on him specifically, a cold intelligence assessing the threat he represented. Then it fled, vanishing into FTL so quickly their sensors barely registered the transition. "Well," Tanaka said into the stunned silence that followed, "I believe we've just escalated an already complex situation." She was right. They hadn't just defended themselves, they'd demonstrated that humans could hurt the shadow hunters. Badly. The next few weeks were a blur of emergency conferences and classified briefings. Marcus found himself presenting his findings to increasingly senior military officials. The young shadow hunters' attack had confirmed their worst fears, the predators were adapting. But it had also revealed new possibilities for defense. "The Delta Wave discovery changes everything," Admiral Chen explained during one such meeting. "We're no longer just naturally repellent to them. We can actively fight back." "With respect, Admiral," Marcus interrupted, "we need to be careful. The Delta Wave broadcast nearly killed that juvenile. If we start using this as a weapon. They've been hunting and killing other species for thousands of years, Doctor. Why shouldn't we give them a taste of their own medicine?" The question haunted Marcus as he returned to his lab. The military wanted to weaponize human brain patterns, turn humanity's unique advantage into an offensive capability. Part of him understood the logic: the shadow hunters were still attacking other species, even if they avoided humans. But something about the young one's final look stayed with him. There had been fear in that moment, yes. But also recognition. Intelligence. Maybe even a spark of understanding. Late that night, unable to sleep, Marcus reviewed the attack footage again. Something about the creature's movement patterns nagged at him. The way it had charged the ship after the Delta Wave broadcast. Arya analyzed the shadow hunter's surface patterns during the final approach. Compare them to known communication frequencies. The AI worked silently for several minutes. Analysis complete. Pattern matches parameters for distress signaling, with 89% probability of attempted communication. Marcus sat back, his mind racing. The creature hadn't been attacking in its final charge, it had been trying to tell them something. The Delta Waves hadn't just heard it, they had opened a channel of communication, however briefly and painfully. He began composing a message to Elena Rossi. They'd been looking at this all wrong. Human brain patterns weren't just weapons or shields. They were a key to understanding the shadow hunters, possibly even communicating with them. Elena Rossi hadn't slept in 36 hours. The message from Marcus Wong had set her mind racing with possibilities she'd never considered. Her lab at Omega 7 was cluttered with holographic displays, each showing different analyses of shadow hunter communication patterns. "You're saying they weren't hunting at all?" she asked Marcus's hologram, which flickered slightly with the distance lag between their stations. "Not exactly." Marcus ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "They were hunting, but not for food. Look at this." He transmitted a new data set. Every recorded shadow hunter attack follows the same pattern. They chase, they terrify, but they rarely kill. It's almost like they're teaching fear, Elena finished, the pieces clicking into place. They're conditioning species to avoid them. The implications were staggering. The galaxy's most feared predators might not be predators at all, but rather some kind of evolutionary shepherds, using fear to guide the development of other species. And humanity's unique brain patterns had accidentally disrupted this ancient pattern. Their discussion was interrupted by a priority alert. A shadow hunter had been spotted near the Proxima Centauri colony, but something was different. This one was broadcasting patterns they'd never seen before. "It's trying to communicate," Elena realized, studying the readings. "Marcus, it's mimicking our delta wave patterns, but modulated. Refined." "They've learned from that juvenile's encounter," Marcus agreed. "They're adapting not just to resist our patterns, but to use them." Elena made a decision. "I'm going out there. We need direct observation. Despite protests from station security and her research team, Elena boarded a small research vessel 12 hours later. The ship was equipped with both standard Dream pattern defenses and Marcus's delta wave modulators, though she hoped she wouldn't need either. The Shadow Hunter was waiting at the coordinates they'd detected it, hanging motionless in space like a patch of void given form. As Elena's ship approached, its surface began to ripple with complex patterns. Beginning translation attempt, her ship's AI announced. Patterns show similarities to both human delta waves and known Shadow Hunter distress signals. Elena activated her ship's communication array, broadcasting a carefully modulated mix of brain patterns. She'd spent hours crafting the signal, trying to find a frequency that would be recognizable but not harmful. The response was immediate. The Shadow Hunter's surface erupted in a dazzling display of crystalline reflections, forming patterns that seemed almost familiar. Pattern match found, the AI reported. The entity is replicating human neural patterns associated with curiosity and non-aggressive intent. They were mimicking human emotions. Over the next several hours, Elena and the Shadow Hunter established a rudimentary form of communication. Through carefully modulated brain patterns and crystal formations, they began to share information. The truth, when it finally emerged through their halting exchange, was both simpler and more profound than anyone had imagined. The Shadow Hunters were indeed shepherds of a sort, but not out of malice or hunger. They were the galaxy's immune system, testing species, challenging them, pushing them to evolve and adapt. But humans had presented them with something entirely new. Human consciousness, particularly during sleep, generated patterns that resonated with the very fabric of spacetime in ways that the Shadow Hunters had never encountered. It wasn't just that humans were harmful to them, humans represented an evolutionary leap that the Shadow Hunters had been trying to guide other species toward for millions of years. "They're not running from us," Elena reported back to Earth Command, her voice thick with emotion. "They're studying us. Every retreat, every avoided contact, they were observing how we'd use our advantage. Whether we'd become predators ourselves." The Shadow Hunter accompanying her message provided final confirmation. Its surface shifted into a perfect reproduction of human neural patterns, hope, curiosity, and something that could only be described as pride. Humanity hadn't just survived the galaxy's ultimate test. They'd exceeded it, evolving past the need for fear as a driving force. Now, the Shadow Hunters sought not to hunt them, but to learn from them. As Elena began preparing for the first official diplomatic contact between humans and Shadow Hunters, she couldn't help but appreciate the cosmic irony. Humanity had spent so long afraid of the monsters in the dark, only to discover that the monsters had been their teachers all along. The real challenge now would be living up to that responsibility. How would humanity help guide other species towards similar evolutionary leaps? And what new forms of consciousness might be waiting to be discovered in the vast expanses of space? Admiral Sarah Chen stood at the observation window of the newly christened diplomatic vessel, Evolution, watching as a delegation of Shadow Hunters approached. Their crystalline forms no longer inspired fear, but rather a deep sense of wonder. In the 6 months since Elena Rossi's breakthrough communication, everything had changed. "Crystalline formation patterns indicate they're ready to begin," announced Dr. Rossi, who had become humanity's primary xenolinguist for Shadow Hunter communications. The scientist's eyes were bright with excitement as she adjusted the ship's neural broadcast array. Today marked the first joint human Shadow Hunter intervention mission. They'd received distress signals from the Arcturian sector, where a particularly aggressive species had begun systematically destroying less developed civilizations. Traditionally, the Shadow Hunters would have handled this through fear conditioning. Now, they were trying something new. The lead Shadow Hunter, whom they'd nicknamed Aurora for its shimmering surface patterns, moved closer to their ship. Its crystalline surface began replicating human theta waves, the patterns of deep meditation and problem-solving. "They've confirmed the target location," Elena translated. "The Vorkath fleet is attacking a pre-FTL civilization in the Arcturus system. Aurora suggests we proceed with the planned demonstration." Chen nodded. This was the moment they'd been preparing for. Begin broadcast synchronization. The evolution's neural arrays powered up, but instead of broadcasting fear or defensive patterns, they began transmitting something entirely new, a carefully crafted combination of human consciousness patterns that the shadow hunters had helped them develop. These waves carried not fear or aggression, but understanding and empathy. As they dropped out of FTL near Arcturus, the scene before them was chaos. Dozens of Vorkath warships surrounded a small rocky planet, their weapons systematically destroying orbital installations. The pre-FTL civilization below was helpless. Broadcast Pattern Alpha, Chen ordered. The combined human Shadowhunter fleet activated their arrays in perfect synchronization. The effect was immediate and stunning. The Vorkath ships began to slow, their weapon systems powering down as the carefully modulated consciousness patterns washed over them. Aurora's surface blazed with complex patterns. They're experiencing a forced empathy response, Elena translated. The patterns are triggering their species' equivalent of emotional revelation. Through their view screens, they watched as the Vorkath fleet hung motionless in space. The consciousness broadcast was forcing them to experience the fear and suffering they'd been causing, not as distant concepts, but as immediate, personal sensations. One by one, the Vorkath ships began to retreat. Not in fear, as species had once fled from the shadow hunters, but in shame and understanding. The broadcast had awakened something in them that centuries of fear conditioning never could, genuine empathy. Neural pattern analysis indicates permanent behavioral modification, Elena reported, her voice filled with awe. They're not just stopping because we're making them. They're choosing to stop because they finally understand. Chen watched as Aurora's crystalline surface shifted into patterns that mimicked human brain waves associated with satisfaction and hope. The shadow hunters had spent millions of years trying to guide species toward consciousness evolution through fear. Now, partnered with humans, they had found a better way. But their success brought new questions. Reports were coming in from across the galaxy of species seeking out human shadowhunter intervention. Some wanted protection, others guidance, and still others simply wished to learn. Humanity had gone from being feared to being sought after as teachers and mediators. We're receiving a transmission from the planet, Elena announced. They're asking who we are. Chen smiled. Tell them we're friends. Tell them we're here to help them join a galaxy that's learning to grow beyond fear. As she watched Aurora communicate with the grateful civilization below, Chen reflected on how far they'd come. Humanity had entered the galactic stage expecting to be prey, only to discover they were something far more important. They were catalysts for change. The shadow hunters had spent eons pushing species to evolve through fear. Now, partnered with humanity, they were learning to guide through understanding. It was a new kind of hunting for consciousness, for empathy, for the potential that lay dormant in every species. And this was just the beginning. Already, their scientists were detecting new patterns in human consciousness that suggested even greater possibilities. The galaxy was entering a new age, and humanity, once feared for their unique minds, would help lead the way. 5 years after the Arcturus intervention, the Galactic Consciousness Institute floated serenely in Earth orbit. Its unique architecture reflected its dual nature. Crystalline spires merged seamlessly with human engineering, creating a structure that was both research center and symbol of interspecies cooperation. Dr. Elena Rossi stood in the main observation chamber, surrounded by representatives from 30 different species. Before them, a young shadow hunter named Nova was attempting something unprecedented, a complete consciousness sync with a human volunteer. Neural patterns stable, Marcus Wong reported from his station. Empathy resonance at 97% and climbing. The volunteer, Captain Maya Patel of the Evolution, lay in a specially designed chamber. Her brain patterns displayed on floating holographs, mirrored perfectly by Nova's crystalline surface. They were attempting to push the boundaries of cross-species consciousness sharing further than ever before. Suddenly, both Maya's and Nova's patterns spiked simultaneously. The assembled aliens murmured in their various languages as new patterns emerged, neither human nor shadow hunter, but something entirely new. "They're accessing something," Elena breathed, watching the readings. "Something beyond individual consciousness." The patterns stabilized into configurations they'd never seen before. Through their combined consciousness, Maya and Nova were touching something fundamental about the nature of awareness itself. The universe, they discovered, was not just filled with conscious beings. Consciousness itself was a force as basic as gravity or electromagnetism. The sync ended naturally after 17 minutes. Maya sat up slowly, her eyes wide with wonder. Nova's surface rippled with complex emotions that needed no translation. "We saw." Maya started, then paused, searching for words. "We saw how it all connects. Consciousness isn't just something we have. It's something we're part of. All of us." The implications revolutionized their understanding of both life and the universe itself. The shadow hunters hadn't just been evolutionary shepherds, they'd been unconsciously guiding species toward this greater awareness. And humans, with their unique brain patterns, had provided the key to accessing it. News of the breakthrough spread rapidly across known space. Species that had once competed for resources now sought to explore consciousness together. The age of physical conquest was giving way to an era of mental expansion. But with this new understanding came responsibility. Some species, like the reformed Vorkath, embraced the change eagerly. Others resisted, fearing the loss of their traditional ways. Humanity and the shadow hunters found themselves serving as guides, helping civilizations navigate this evolutionary leap at their own pace. "We've become what we needed when we first reached the stars," Elena told the Galactic Council during their millennial session. "Not conquerors or victims, but teachers. Not predators or prey, but partners in consciousness." As she spoke, her words were translated not just through traditional means, but through consciousness patterns themselves, each species receiving not just the meaning, but the feeling behind her words. The chamber's crystalline walls, grown from modified shadow hunter biology, resonated with shared understanding. Above Earth, more institutes were under construction. Each would serve as a beacon for species ready to explore their consciousness potential. The shadow hunters, once the galaxy's most feared predators, now served as consciousness architects, their crystalline forms perfectly suited to amplifying and directing these new awareness patterns. But this wasn't the end of the story. Initial probes into deep space had detected consciousness patterns unlike anything they'd ever encountered. Something ancient and vast was stirring in the galactic core, patterns suggesting awareness on a scale that dwarfed their current understanding. The hunt would continue, but not for prey or power. Humanity, the shadow hunters, and their growing alliance of conscious species would hunt for understanding. They would chase not fear, but enlightenment. And in doing so, they would continue to evolve, to grow, to become something greater than any single species could be alone. As Elena watched Nova and Maya prepare for another sync attempt, she smiled at the irony of it all. Humanity's greatest gift hadn't been their ability to frighten the galaxy's apex predators. It had been their ability to turn those same predators into partners in the greatest adventure of all, the exploration of consciousness itself. The universe, they had discovered, was not a place of predator and prey, but a vast network of emerging awareness. And together, they would help it awaken.